It had been a busy year for the Arlesdale Railway. From incidents and accidents, the little engines grew busier than ever. But thanks to the increase in tourism the railway experienced, the railway soon gathered the funds necessary to perform some well-needed maintenance. One morning, the three engines were gathered at the shed and discussed the recent news. "I swear," Mike said, grumbling to the others, "all these new passengers are making me feel exhausted. All they do is complain. Complaining about how small we are, how small our coaches are, how small the railway is. Oh, I'm sorry we're not as big as the others." The other two rolled their eyes. They were used to Mike's complaining. Mike continued, "I just don't see where we need to be pulling them anyways. Why can't we just scrap the tourist trains and go back to pulling freight?" "Come on, Mike," Bert replied. "You know the tourists are the reason we're still operating. Goods alone can't keep a railway like ours operating." Mike was about to retort when the three heard a sound of a car driving up. "Shh!" Rex shushed. "Mr. Duncan's coming." The small controller left his car and headed towards the engine shed. He had some important news to share with them. "Good morning, you three," he said. "I've got an announcement regarding the maintenance work. Do you recall how our line runs over the old Mid Sodor?" "Yes," the three engines said in unison. "Well," continued the controller, "we've gotten in touch with a few historians and volunteers, and we're in talks to extend the line further east to the old Mid Sodor tracks. This way we can boost visits to our railway while also creating a museum at the old sheds where Duke was found to honor the railway that came before us." Bert's face fell when he heard the news, remembering something Duke had told him. "Bert, are you all right?" asked the controller as he noticed. "Oh, yes, I'm fine," Bert stammered. "My apologies, sir." "I see," replied the controller. He paused for a moment before continuing. "As I'm sure you can tell, this will take a lot of work, and quite a bit of time. I expect you three to cooperate, and no funny business. We don't need any escapades getting in the way of our extension. Do you understand?" "Yes," they all replied, though Bert was hesitant. "Good," replied the controller, as he told the engines their jobs for the day. Bert, meanwhile, was lost in thought. Later that evening, when Bert was resting in the shed, Rex went to ask him about it. "Hey, Bert," Rex asked. "This morning, when Mr. Duncan was telling us about the extension, you started getting anxious. Why?" Bert paused, considering if he should tell Rex. Eventually, though, he decided to tell Rex the full story. The prior summer, the Arlesdale Railway had run a special event to celebrate the history of the Mid Sodor Railway. There were tents, games, activities, and more for the visitors to enjoy. Duke was even brought over from the Scarlowry Railway, placed on a flatbed near the station. The little engines enjoyed talking with him when they passed through the station. On one of those days, after all the visitors had gone home for the day, Bert arrived at the station to drop off some workmen. "Good evening, Duke," he said cheerfully. "How are the visitors today?" "Oh, they've been well, Bert," replied Duke. "I must say, I'm not used to this kind of attention," he chuckled. "Really?" asked Bert. "Why not?" "Well, back on the Mid Sodor, I didn't really bother getting attention," replied Duke. "At first it was all split evenly between us, but on a railway with a dozen or so engines over its course, it was inevitable that some got more attention than others, and usually the majority of the attention tended to go to the engines who showed off the most." "Oh," replied Bert, "like Peter Sam and Sir Handel." Duke paused for a moment. He was still getting used to their new names. "Not just them," he replied at last. "The others, too." "Others?" replied Bert, puzzled. He had heard about how the Mid Sodor had many engines, but he could only think of a few himself. "Well," answered Duke, "the only engine that was ever sold outside of Stuart and Falcon was Freddy. The others, like I, were just left where we were when the railway closed, forgotten by the outside world." Bert was taken aback. "So you mean they're still out there?" he asked. Duke sighed. "I don't know, Bert," he replied. "I never got the chance to know. The only time I was awake out there, ever since the closure, was when I was being rescued. At the time, the rescue team was more focused on me than the others that could have been out there. Bert could only imagine what Duke meant by that, and his curiosity got the better of him. So they are still out there? He asked. Well, Duke started before he paused. His face grew stern, and he sighed. Bert, I understand your curiosity, but look, I don't really want to go much more into it. It's not worth the trouble. The only advice I have for you is, whatever you do, please don't prod too much into the resting places. Nothing good can come of it. Back in the present, Rex was speechless. None of this had ever crossed his mind. But now that he knew what Duke had said, he was beginning to understand Bert's hesitation. I'm still concerned about it myself, replied Bert. But if the controller says we have to go down there, I don't see how Duke's ramblings would convince him otherwise, especially since he never said what would happen if we were to go down there. The two engines exchanged a worried look before they were interrupted by a familiar puffing. It was Mike, who had finally returned to the sheds after his work for the day. What in the world are you two going on about? He grumbled. Mike had overheard the two talking, but about what specifically he had no idea. Oh, nothing, said Rex dismissively. Bert, however, had an idea, and exchanged a glance at Rex before responding. Say, Mike, he began, you don't like pulling passengers, do you? Mike snorted. What kind of a question is that? Of course I don't, he replied. Well, Bert replied, why don't you take the maintenance trains? There's no passengers to criticize you out there. Or would you rather keep pulling the tourist trains? Rex added cheekily. Mike considered. All right, I'll pull it, he answered at last. I don't see why you're so hung up on me pulling it, though. And with that, he went to sleep. With the small controller accepting the proposal, over the next few days Mike and the workmen would set off for Arlesdale Green, constructing a new set of tracks. It was hard work, but Mike didn't mind. At least, not more than usual. After all, it was definitely better than bothersome passenger services. But eventually, as the crew began to near the former site of the Mid Sodor sheds, his mood surrounding the work changed. He grew anxious and got a strange feeling about the place, almost as if something or someone didn't want him there. Every night he'd return to the shed, restless. He couldn't shake the feeling that, somehow, he'd gotten himself involved in something much larger than he thought. Early one morning, Mike found himself awoken by his driver. It wasn't surprising, as Mike's driver would wake him up every morning. What was surprising, however, was that it was still dark out. Mike yawned and stared at his driver sleepily. What's this? I thought we weren't supposed to leave for a few hours, he asked. Afraid there's been a change of plans, this driver, also yawning. Controller said he spoke with the workmen about working longer hours. Great! That means more work for us, groaned Mike. Though deep down he was worried. If they worked any longer, they'd be out past dark. And who knows what might be lurking behind those trees. I know, Mike, replied his driver. But the sooner we can get our work done, the sooner we can be done with this. All right, said Mike nervously. I hope you're right. With that, the little engine set off to collect his train and head on out to the site of the old sheds. When Mike finally arrived, he couldn't help but take note of his surroundings. Everything seemed off in a noticeable but minuscule way. The birds chirped in the trees, but the sounds of nature were quieter than usual. The air was cold, as was expected for a late winter morning like this one, but it felt more chilling than usual. And, most of all, everyone seemed more on edge than before. Well, mostly everyone. Oi, Jeremy, one of the workmen said to another. You reckon that green engine's still behind those sheds? I'm not sure, Andy, he replied. I heard a rumour a few years back about him getting scrapped once the railway shut down, but I can't be sure. You want to go check it out? Asked Andy cheekily. Yeah, why not? Replied Jeremy. I suppose it'd be good for a laugh. Mike, meanwhile, was not amused. He didn't want to know what remained behind those walls, engine or not, because whatever it was, the answer wouldn't be good. The two workmen walked over to the back of the sheds, with Andy getting the first look. "What the hell?" said Andy, confused. "Well, can you see something?" replied Jeremy, who had just caught up with him. "That's the strange thing," replied Andy. "There isn't something. No smoke box, no boiler, no nothing." "Rumor's true then, I guess," replied Jeremy. The two paused, staring, until Andy spoke again. "Well," Andy said, "I guess someone finally got some use out of 'em." But before Andy could finish his sentence, a tree close by to the sheds toppled over, nearly hitting the two workmen. They jumped back a bit, before looking at each other surprised. "Bloody hell!" replied Andy shakily. "That was too close." "Let's get out of here," replied Jeremy, and the two ran back to the rest of the crew. They had seen everything and were just as spooked. Everyone, including Mike and his crew, agreed that they best head back before anything else happened. They clambered into Mike's open coaches, and with a jolt, Mike set off back to the yards. On his way back, however, he ran into a familiar green engine. "Mike?" asked Rex inquisitively. "What are you doing back here already? I thought you were supposed to be at the work site." "Oh, hi, Rex," Mike replied, startled. I just got back. A tree fell near where they were working, and, they're refusing to work." Rex thought back to what Bert had told him, and was beginning to have second thoughts. "Well, that's, unfortunate," he replied, uncomfortable with the situation. I best be off, though. These trucks won't deliver themselves. Sorry I can't talk more." Rex quickly set off, leaving behind an even more confused and anxious Mike. A little while later, Mike and the workers finally arrived back at the yards. He let out a small sigh of relief, but that relief would be short-lived, as someone arrived to speak with him. "Mike?" quizzed the small controller. "What on earth are you doing back here? Surely you haven't completed your maintenance duties yet?" "Oh, no, sir," Mike stammered. "Not at all." The controller noticed Mike's worried expression. He knew Mike's usual attitude, and if this was any other occasion, he'd be in for a thorough talking to. But he could tell this was anything but usual. "Are you all right?" he asked, concerned. "You sound awfully shaky. Did something happen?" But before the little engine could reply, the workmen leapt from the coaches and began to swarm the controller, frantically trying to explain the situation. "Everyone, please, one at a time," barked the controller. At that, the workmen quieted, and Andy spoke up. "There was a tree, and it fell nearby," he stammered. "A tree?" the controller asked, raising an eyebrow. "What's this about a tree?" Another workman spoke up. "Well, sir, we arrived near the old sheds and began clearing away some of the foliage. And all of a sudden I hear what sounds like a tree toppling over, close to the sheds. It nearly hit two of our workers. We were all spooked, so we ran off." I see," said the controller. "Did you get a good look at the tree?" "No, sir," replied another workman. "I assumed it was a beaver, but there wasn't a river in sight. Not that I know of, at least." The controller pondered for a moment. "Well," he said, "perhaps there's only one way to find out for sure." He turned back to Mike before continuing. "Mike," he said, "take me to the work site. I need to investigate this further." Mike was taken aback. "Go back? I can't go back there." But before Mike could protest any further, Mr. Duncan raised his hand to stop him. "Now, Mike," he said sternly, "we have a railway to run. We cannot delay such an important project. We'll have the workmen accompanying us, should another incident occur." Mike sighed and accepted, as Mr. Duncan motioned for some of the workmen to return to the coaches. Once they boarded, the train set off once again to the old sheds. An uneasy air returned to loom over the train as they arrived. The workmen disembarked first, followed by Mr. Duncan. "Please show me where it fell," he asked Jeremy. He obliged, and led him to the scene of the accident. "There it is," replied Jeremy, shuddering. "To think it almost took me with it an hour ago." The workmen and the controller surveyed the site of the tree. Its bark was clearly cut through, though from what he couldn't identify. Mr. Duncan looked back at the workmen. "I recall one of you theorizing this as a beaver's doing?" "Aye, sir," one of them replied. "That may very well be the case," he replied. "Have a look at the bark." The workmen got closer, peering at the tree, as Mr. Duncan continued. "It's been tampered with, clearly not caused by age or weather." "How odd," another workman replied. "I didn't know beavers went this far into the woods." "Well," Mr. Duncan replied, "it's the only explanation standing, unless there's any objections." "No, sir," replied the workman. "We probably scared it off when we came here," Andy replied, chuckling. "Sounds like the little pest nearly cost us our lives." "I'm glad you find it funny," scoffed Jeremy, "'cause I don't." "Enough," Mr. Duncan said sternly. "Now we still have work to do. In the future, please ensure that all workmen stand clear of any damaged trees." "Understood, sir," they replied. They returned to their work as Mr. Duncan boarded Mike's coach. Mike, still relieved to be leaving the site, couldn't help but crack a snide joke. "Beavers! Errant little rodents. Some things are just nothing but trouble." As soon as the little engine finished his remark, he suddenly had an uneasy feeling creep through his boiler. He wasn't sure why, but he felt as if his remark had made something in the forest upset with him. Mike wasn't alone, however, as within his coach, Mr. Duncan was beginning to rethink the project himself. Something about the site seemed wrong, and between the way everyone described the area and the strange occurrence that he had investigated, it seemed to him that whatever it was that was watching over them was not happy. Soon, though, the group returned to the station and went back to their respective duties, hoping this would be the last of it. Some days later, Mike and Rex were awoken by their drivers, having an oddly intense conversation. "I don't understand what Mr. Duncan isn't getting," Mike's driver said to Rex's, as they both approached their engines. "This was a serious accident. I can't believe a little rodent's to blame. I'm sure it's something else." "What sort of something?" Rex's driver asked. Mike's driver hesitated before answering. "Well, call me crazy, but I have a suspicion we're dealing with something more supernatural." Mike and Rex, who had only just begun listening to the conversation, were shocked. "Supernatural?" Rex asked. "Well," stuttered Mike, stammering, "I am sure there's a logical explanation, driver. If not a beaver, then something else." "I wouldn't be so sure of that, Mike," replied his driver as he started his fire. Regardless of the past hang-ups on the state of the project, they had work to do. So they set off once more to the work site. But on the way, Mike once again felt like he and his train were being watched, more closely than before. He gulped, and tried to put on a brave face. Once they arrived, the men set to work clearing away the undergrowth and placing new rails. A crane had been brought in to help with the rail laying, and all was going as it should. That was, until one of the workmen noticed a peculiar item shining through the rocks and weeds. "What's this?" he pondered to himself as he picked it up. "Geoffrey, come look at this," he shouted. "What have you got there, Barry?" replied Geoffrey, as he joined his colleague. "I think it's some kind of lamp," Barry answered, looking it over. It was rusted and had its glass lens cracked, but otherwise it appeared to be mostly intact. "What shall I do with it?" Barry asked. "She might still work," replied Geoffrey. "Just throw her in the van." With that, Barry took the lamp to Mike's brake van and placed it on the guard's table before returning back to his work. Throughout the day, the lamp stayed where it was as Mike and his train traveled back and forth, delivering supplies to the work site. That was until the afternoon, when Mike was returning to the work site with a flatbed of rails. As was typical of Mike, he wasn't paying attention, and noticed too late that he had been accidentally switched onto the wrong line. Braking hard, he narrowly avoided crashing into the buffers at the end. But between the screeching of brakes, they heard another sound. It was the shattering of glass, as the lamp had slid off the table and shattered onto the brake van's floor. "Mike!" the guard shouted out. "You've shattered the lamp!" Just then, an ear-piercingly loud whistle rang out across the clearing. Many of the workers jumped and covered their ears, but unfortunately for Mike, the operator of the crane on the line next to him also jumped in surprise, bumping the controls and accidentally swinging his crane arm violently to the right, directly into Mike's boiler. The little engine laid on his side, badly dented. His driver, thankfully, was all right, as the crane arm had mercifully avoided the worst spot. Immediately, the workmen sprung into action, attending to Mike and his crew. "Somebody radio the controller!" Burry shouted out. Soon, Rex arrived with a second crane, along with Mr. Duncan. "I'll say, if this is another attempt to get out of work because of ghosts, I am going to be very—" he began, before seeing the sight of him. "Oh my!" he exclaimed. "Mike!" Rex cried out. "Are you all right?" Mike groaned. "I've been better," he said weakly. "Just get me back on the rails." While Rex helped Mike back on the rails, Mr. Duncan turned his attention to the crane operator, Lenny. "I just moved the crane back to its usual position," Lenny said. "Was about to raise it again when I heard an ear-piercingly loud whistle. It frightened me and, well, I accidentally bumped the controls further right." Mr. Duncan sighed. "Your carelessness has led to one of our 3 engines to be badly damaged," he said sternly. "We'll be down to 2 engines at this rate. How do you think we'll manage to continue this project and our usual goods and passenger work? All because of Mike's whistle." "With all due respect, sir," said Geoffrey, "I don't think it was Mike whistling." "Then who could be whistling, then?" asked Mr. Duncan. "Mike was the only engine out there. Bert and Rex are miles away." "Well, sir, I think I may know what happened," replied Barry. "When we were clearing the area, I found an old lamp. It was rusted, but still intact. I placed it in the brake van to ask the station master about later, but Mike was going too fast, and in the process of braking, the lamp fell and shattered. Then an unfamiliar whistle happened." Mr. Duncan pondered for a moment before responding. "I see," he replied. He then turned his attention back to Lenny. "For the time being, I am taking you off crane duty. You'll be allocated to the ballast chute until I can trust you with heavy machinery. Understood?" "Yes, sir," Lenny replied. "Good," Mr. Duncan replied, before making his way back to Rex's coach. On his way back, he spoke to Mike's driver. "How are you holding up?" he asked. "Not great," Mike's driver mumbled, "but thankfully most of the plane's gone away." "That's good," Mr. Duncan replied. "I just don't get it," he mumbled to himself. "Something wrong, controller?" Mike's driver asked. "Well," Mr. Duncan replied, "I've been told the workmen heard an ear-piercingly loud whistle, but surely Mike's isn't that loud." "That wasn't Mike's whistle, sir," Mike's driver replied. Mr. Duncan raised an eyebrow. "Why not?" he inquired. "There wasn't another engine for miles." "I never pulled that whistle cord," Mike's driver replied. "Besides, if anyone knows Mike's whistle, it's me. That definitely didn't sound like Mike." "What did it sound like?" Mr. Duncan asked. "Well," Mike's driver replied, "it was long, shrill, high-pitched, like Percy over on the Northwestern, but not exactly." The two sat in silence for a while. As Mr. Duncan pondered, he was going over the past week's experiences at the extension, and things weren't adding up. He wondered, perhaps this whole supernatural business may not be as far-fetched as I once believed. "Well," Mike's driver began, "considering the stories I've heard about this island, the runaway boulder on the Scar Lorry, abandoned stations lighting up on the Northwestern, and even rumors of ghost engines by workmen, it's not too out of the ordinary." Mr. Duncan was taken aback, not just by the observation, but because he hadn't realized he was wondering out loud. "Oh, I suppose," he recovered. "But regardless, I just can't let a project like this stop over a whistle and a silly tree. I've got an image to keep up. Letting a ghost at the best of us will paint us all as fools." Rather foolish than sorry, mumbled Mike's driver. The two remained in silence after that for the remainder of the ride back to Arlesdale West. When they arrived, they found Donald there with the breakdown train, ready to transport Mike to Crivens Gate for repairs. Donald was shocked to see Mike in such a condition. "Lord sakes, Mike," Donald replied when he saw the little engine. "What happened?" "Crane hit me," Mike replied, groaning a little. "Did some sizable damage, as you can tell." "Dunno, Lordy. We'll get you on the flatbed in no time," Donald soothed. As the controller watched Donald set off with Mike in tow, he couldn't help but get a sinking feeling. Not just about the project, but the railway as a whole. He knew he had some tough conversations ahead of him. One of them would come later that night, as he arrived to speak with the remaining two engines. Bert and Rex were waiting at the shed when he arrived. All three were feeling quite disheartened from the day's events. "Hello, you two," Mr. Duncan said solemnly. "Hello, sir," replied the two engines, equally solemn. "I'm sure you're worried about Mike's accident," he began. "Thankfully, Mike is currently on his way to undergo repairs." The two engines sighed a little, but Mr. Duncan continued. "His repairs will take a while, so for the foreseeable future we shall have to make do with what we have. I've yet to decide what shall happen to the project, but given the recent events surrounding it, it may not be in our best interest to continue work on it immediately." The two engines understood, and all three remained silent until Bert spoke up. "Sir, there's something I've been meaning to tell you." Mr. Duncan looked up at Bert. "What is it?" he asked. "Well, sir, it's about Duke," he replied, and began to tell him about the experience with Duke. As he spoke, the controller remained silent, listening intently, and considered Duke's words carefully. "I see," he finally said. "I suppose we should have listened to his warning." He paused before sighing. "Well, we've gone too far just to cancel it. The cost alone would put scrutiny on our operations. I'll have to put the project on hold for now, but if we cannot find a solution within the next month, we have no choice but to continue, ghost or not." "Understood, sir," replied the two engines. With that, the controller said his goodbyes and set off for the night. Normally, the two engines would be discussing what the controller had said, but not this time. Neither of them knew what to say, aside from that they didn't want to confront whatever entity was making its presence known at the work site. A few days passed, with Rex and Bert continuing their usual passenger and goods duties. Good as his word, the controller had put the project on hold, but they knew he couldn't do so for long. Without Mike, the mood of the railway had shifted, and the other engines began to take notice. While Donald had already been informed of the incident with Mike, Duck would soon come to know as well. "Hello, Rex," Duck said as he dropped into Arlesdale West one day. "Oh, hello, Duck," Rex replied, smiling briefly, before his smile faded. "Is there something wrong?" asked Duck. "Well," Rex began, "we've been sorting a new extension over where Duke's shed was. Mike was going to work over there, but with some incidents, he's now at the works, undergoing repairs." "Oh my!" Duck gasped. "I sure do hope he's all right." "Controller says his maintenance is going smoothly," Rex reassured him. "But he put the project on hold, but he says he can't do it forever. That's the thing that's been worrying us. I can't imagine trying to make three jobs work between two engines." Rex frowned. "It's not the workload that's the issue," he said. "It's something more than that. There's something out there that isn't happy with us doing it. Mike's driver says there's something supernatural about it." "What do you mean?" Duck replied. "Well," answered Rex, "first a tree fell on its own, almost hitting a few of our workmen. They initially believed it to be a work of a beaver, but it didn't seem right. There were reports of tools missing, and many of the workmen reported the feeling of being watched, or cold spots. And a loud, unidentified whistle was heard recently, and that's what led to Mike's accident. Crane operator got spooked and rammed into Mike. Mike's driver swears the whistle wasn't his." "How odd," Duck remarked. "Yeah," replied Rex. "Controller said that ghost or not, he couldn't hold off the project forever. He couldn't just abandon the project. So unless he found a solution soon, he'd have to resume operations." As soon as he finished speaking, Rex's guard blew his whistle, and he set off, saying goodbye to Duck. Duck soon left after, puzzled, and thought about what Rex had said. He was still thinking about it later, when he met Toby at Tidmouth. "Good afternoon, Duck. How's the work?" asked Toby. "Oh, the work's been fine," Duck replied. "I've been thinking about what Rex told me this morning." He proceeded to tell Toby what Rex had told him. Toby frowned. "That's troubling," he said. "I hope they can find something soon. I wish I could be of more help, but I'm afraid I haven't an idea either." "Me neither," replied Duck as he set off. Toby was left to contemplate what Duck had told him, but he didn't dwell on it much, as he had work to be done. So off he went, down his branch line, and to his next stop, Bertram's old mine. Bertram's mine was one of Toby's favorite spots on his line. Ever since it had been renovated to a festival area, it was almost always bustling with people, but at this time it was quiet and empty. Bertram noticed Toby chuffing in, and said hello. "Hello, Bertram," Toby answered. "Seems oddly quiet around here." "Indeed," said Bertram, frowning. "The line's going to be under maintenance soon. No festivities for the next month while we sort it out. That means I'll have to be in my shed the whole time." "I see," Toby replied. He frowned, before remembering something. The mention of maintenance reminded him of what Duck had told him. He knew Bertram was a Mid Sodor engine, so perhaps he might be of some help to them. "Say, Bertram," Toby began, "you're a Mid Sodor engine, right?" Bertram perked up at the mention. "Yes, why do you ask?" Toby then told Bertram about the situation on the Arlesdale Railway, and how they believe it to be haunted. Bertram listened intently, thinking back to his time on the Mid Sodor, until suddenly an idea came to him. "I think I have a plan that can help both of us out," he smiled at last. "Oh?" Toby replied. "What is it?" "Perhaps I could accompany them to the site, and hopefully deal with the entity myself, if it comes to it. I'm not going to be able to do anything here in the meantime," Bertram explained. He had a sneaking suspicion of what, or who, the entity was, and was hoping this would provide some long-desired closure. Toby agreed to help, and set off to finish his work. Later that day, he met with the small controller and Bertram's owner to discuss the plan. "It's risky," Mr. Duncan said, after Toby explained Bertram's plan, "but I see no other course of action. If Bertram is fine with it, I suppose I'll allow it." "Bertram's going to be out of commission anyways," Bertram's owner replied, "so it shouldn't do too much harm." With their permission received, the plan was in motion. The next day, the small controller spoke with Rex and Bert, explaining Bertram's plan. "I'm not entirely sure what Bertram has in mind," Rex said. "How's he supposed to get to the work site?" Bert thought for a moment. "By road?" he answered. "I know Duke was transferred by lorry." "Actually," Mr. Duncan replied, "he won't be going by road. He's going by rail." "By rail?" Rex questioned, confused. "He's a narrow-gauge engine. He can't fit on our tracks." "Yes, of course," replied Mr. Duncan. "He'll be on a flatbed, while you two transport him there." The two engines stared at each other, worried. "I understand it'll be difficult," he continued, "but I trust you two can get it done." "Yes, sir," replied the two engines. The coming days were spent getting the railway ready for the arrangements. The two engines worked tirelessly to ensure that Bertram's visit would go on without any trouble, although they both couldn't help but worry about going back to the work site, even with Bertram by their side. Soon, though, the fateful day came. Bertram had been transported by rail to the yard, and was being loaded onto a flatbed. "So I've heard you've been having trouble with ghosts," he said to the little engines. "Indeed," Rex replied. "I hope this will put a stop to it." "I'll try my best," Bertram said, determined. With Bertram loaded onto the flatbed, the three engines, alongside Mr. Duncan, set off for the work site. As they ventured onwards down the line, Bertram was silent. It had been many decades since he was working on the line, and his memories were rushing back to him. Every mountain, every tree, every hill, every stream. It felt like he was returning home. He could feel the wind on his boiler, as he imagined himself chuffing down the line, like he did a very long time ago. But his nostalgic trip would take a turn. When he arrived at the former sheds, he couldn't help but shudder. The final spot he remembered from his time on the railway, before he was sent to the mine. It was Howie who remembered it, but different. Something in the air felt odd, a coldness to it, almost as if the warmth had been violently removed. "Here we are," Rex said, his voice wavering. The two little engines left Bertram's flatbed on the siding and moved over. Mr. Duncan left his coach and went to speak with Bertram. "Are you ready?" he asked. "I suppose," replied Bertram. "It's now or never." Mr. Duncan nodded and signaled to the two engines. They blasted their whistles. The trees shook a little, and the birds flew away. The three engines waited with bated breath to see what would transpire. Suddenly, they heard a faint wheezing, coming from the sheds. "What's that?" began Rex, before Bert promptly shushed him. As the three engines stared ahead, they saw a faint outline of an engine materialize. It was a little tank engine with faint green paint. An unfamiliar whistle sounded off as it appeared. "What's that?" Bert asked, trembling. "Smudger," Bertram said in disbelief. Sm sm Smudger?" Rex stammered. "I remember you," Bertram began, his face turning into a scowl. "I've had quite the history with you," he began. "I first met Smudger many a decade ago. When I first arrived, I was overwhelmed. All these new faces, all these new responsibilities. I tried getting along with the others best I could, but I never really fit in. Smudger, however, was my friend. He was rough around the edges, a bit snarky, but his heart was in the right place, or so I thought." Bertram paused and sighed before continuing. "As I found my bearings, I started to drift from Smudger. I started getting along more with Duke. It was a brotherly bond of sorts. Smudger didn't like that. He'd often complained to me about how I was neglecting him, or how I shouldn't listen to Duke. I tried to reason with him, but it was no use. One day, a few years after I came on the railway, the manager asked Smudger to take a goods train up the line. By this point, he was sulking daily, partly about his work, but partly because of how the manager wouldn't let him pull passengers. In typical Smudger fashion, he took his train and set off to get his work done as quickly as possible, so he could go back to his shed. Whether intentionally or not, one of his trucks managed to damage the track. Little did he know, I was pulling my first passenger train right after him. The manager, as well as multiple important board members, were on there to observe my ability to pull coaches. I must admit, I was a little careless, but I had to make up for time, as Duke was running late. I never saw the damaged track, and Bertram paused. After a little bit, Mr. Duncan spoke up. "And what?" he asked. Bertram sighed again. 12 were injured in the ensuing crash. Thankfully, everyone survived, but 2 of the 12 that were injured included a board member and the manager. Needless to say, I got a major lashing after that. He was under the impression that I had intentionally tried to sabotage the train. I was stuck in the shed for 3 days while manager decided what to do with me. Every time I saw Smudger pass by me, he always looked away, either from guilt or from the harsh consequences of his actions. Eventually, manager sent me away to work the gold mine, and that's where I stayed, alone. Duke never came to see me. He thought I was a disgrace to the railway, and for a while I felt like one. I'd occasionally see one of the other engines, who took pity on me. They would tell me about the goings on, who's arrived, who's been sold, and what the situation of the railway was like. Eventually, the gold started to dry up, and they'd come less and less, until one day they left and never returned. I was left there, all alone. When Bertram finished, he turned his attention to Smudger. He stared at him, his eyes locked on his. "Smudger," he continued finally, "all I can say is, why? Did I do you wrong? Was it an accident? Smudger, for the first time since appearing, looked sad. He glanced down at his buffies, avoiding eye contact. It wasn't an accident, was it? Bertram said. Smudger's eyes remained on his buffies. Bertram's rage grew. All those years, Bertram continued, growing angry. And all for a mistake that wasn't even under my control. Duke can't even stomach talking to me. I haven't even met Stuart or Falcon. Freddie, Jerry, Jim, Tim, all of them. They all thought I was just a silly engine who got too puffed up in the smoke box. Made a rookie mistake. And yet, I regret most of all that I never got a proper goodbye to the railway I called home, until it left me far in the dust. What do you have to say for that? Smudger glanced back at Bertram, an angry scowl drawn across his face. Bertram knew he had hit something close to home for the lost soul. He was about to continue his lashing before he stopped himself. He was upset with Smudger, yes, but anger wasn't going to solve any issues here. So, he took a different approach. I know why you're doing this, Bertram sighed, before staring at Smudger sympathetically. These sheds are what you once called home. This is your sanctuary, the eternal resting place for your malevolent soul. But Smudger, we can't live in the past. It's the present. And even after all the anguish you've caused me, I want to help you move on. Smudger, still hurt by the previous lashing, wheezed angrily. I know, Bertram continued. I can't lie. I myself was in a very similar situation. Smudger stopped his wheezing and raised an eyebrow. You know the mine I was sent to? In a way, that was my home, my final resting place. And for many years it was just me out there, abandoned. Then Toby found me and rediscovered it. With the help of volunteers, we were able to renovate the place into a festival area. I was skeptical at first, because I'd grown attached to it. But in the end, it's helped me move on. My legacy has been cemented. Don't you wish for yours to do the same? For the first time in many years, Smudger smiled. Bertram smiled back at him before concluding by saying, That's a good engine. May your soul find the afterlife well. With that, Smudger blew his shrill whistle one last time, and he disappeared. Bert, Rex, and Mr. Duncan were taken aback by this. None of them had said a word during Bertram's confrontation, as all were in awe. Bertram had noticed this. I must admit, I'm not sure what just happened, he said. In all honesty, I didn't really have a plan. I just suppose it came from the heart. The four stood in silence until Rex finally spoke up. Is he gone, Bertram? Bertram contemplated, feeling the air around him. It had gone back to its usual warmth, and he could feel nature return to its usual state. Yes, he said at last. He's moved on. I suppose now that that's settled, we can finally start work on the new history center again, Mr. Duncan said. The little engines agreed. With Smudger having finally moved on, Bertram returned to his line, and work recommenced on the extension. It took some time to begin, as the workmen were still fearful, but the air grew calmer, almost as if a warm spirit was looking over them. Soon, through the hard work of the engines and the workmen, the extension was complete, and the opening was just a day away. Bert and Rex waited excitedly at Arlesdale West, as they were expecting a visit from Duck, alongside a familiar friend. Mike! The two engines exclaimed as they saw him arrive on Duck's flatbed. Rex! Bert! Mike exclaimed. I must admit, it's good seeing you two again. That's new, Rex whispered. Be quiet, Bert whispered back. He'll hear you. Although I have to say, continued Mike, I don't know what in the world they've done to the works. There's tons of chattering engines all around there. And there was this little crane, Kevin, I think? He would constantly crash into things and fall over. I have no idea how he's still working there. That's the old Mike, Rex chuckled to himself. Well, Mike, Bert said, we're glad you're home. Indeed, Mike agreed. Ready for the celebration tomorrow? Mike scoffed. Watch me get stuck with passenger duty. Rex and Bert groaned. Soon the day came for the celebrations to commence. Mike, Rex, and Bert were busy pushing and pulling supply trucks, passengers, and some special guests to and from the event. I have to say, Bertram spoke to Rex, it's good to be back. I can bet, Rex replied. It's always exciting to see something new, but I think I know something even more exciting. Oh? Bertram asked. And what would that be? Just then, Mike and Bert pushed in, pulling a very special guest on the flatbed. Oh my! Exclaimed Bertram. It's Duke! Bertram, my dear engine, Duke exclaimed. Oh, how the time has gone by! Bertram was taken aback. He wasn't expecting Duke to be so excited. Oh, you aren't disappointed? Bertram asked. Why on earth would I be? Duke replied. Oh, I just thought, when the last time I saw you all those years ago, you were saying how I was a disgrace to the railway, Bertram sighed. Well, Bertram, it's been many years since I've seen you, Duke said. As they say, time tends to heal wounds. As much as I may have been embarrassed or ashamed back then, I've since reflected on our time together, and I'm sorry for the way I treated you after the accident. Duke, began Bertram. I understand if you don't accept, Duke said. I know it's sudden. I accept, Duke, Bertram said immediately. Don't worry about it. After all, we're brothers. We're stronger together. Indeed we are, replied Duke. Indeed we are. Soon it was time for the small controller to give his speech. The Earl of Sodor was introducing him. It is with great pleasure that I introduce the controller of the railway, Mr. Fergus Duncan. The crowd erupted with applause as Mr. Duncan took the stage. Good afternoon, everyone, he began. It is on a great day such as this one that we may come together to celebrate the opening of the Mid Sodor Historical Centre. As many of you know, we first began this project many months ago. Soon after, we were dealt many roadblocks, including some of the supernatural variety. But it was with great effort from our own Bert and Rex, and especially the Mid Sodor's own Bertram, that we managed to overcome these obstacles and continue the construction. The purpose of the Mid Sodor, for all of its existence, was to provide a respite for the many businesses and people that called Sodor their home. And it is the goal of the historical center today to provide a respite to the same engines and crews that called the Mid Sodor home, so that future generations may learn about the history of the railway, its crew, and its engines, and keep the spirit of the railway alive for decades to come. And it is my pleasure today to officially mark the Mid Sodor Historical Center as now open. Applause erupted once more, alongside the engines whistling in agreement. And through the trees, a shrill whistle joined them.